So we're here today to discuss the Building Safety Act and how it relates to developers and the construction and delivery of new high-risk buildings, or HRBs. This is the first of two vlogs in our series where we're going to be looking at the enhanced building regime for HRBs. Today we'll be discussing building HRBs, and a later vlog will discuss the management of in-occupation HRBs. So Iain, can you provide us with an outline sketch of the key issues?
Yes, certainly, Luke. There's quite a bit to cover off on today in a short space of time. So I think that the best thing that we can do really is just dive straight in. As you can see, I've got a list here, and the things that I want to cover off today are gateways, the golden thread, duty holders and their obligations, and of course building safety regulators sign off at the end of construction projects.
That's great. So no doubt our viewers have heard of these terms before, but can you give us some background as to why they're on every developer's lips, why are they so important, and what do they relate to?
Yeah, of course. I mean, firstly, it needs to be understood that before the coming into force of the Building Safety Act in August 2023, none of these terms had any real legal meaning when it came to the delivery of development projects or in relation to building safety sign-off under the building safety regime. It's only following the Grenfell tragedy that the government changed the building safety regime root and branch, particularly in relation to HRBs, and that's where this terminology started to be used as it was defined in the Building Safety Act.
Okay, now I know the majority of our viewers will know what an HRB is for the purposes of the Building Safety Act, but can you give us a quick recap?
Yeah, I mean, in the broadest sense, a HRB is a building that's either at least 18 metres in height or has 7 stories and has at least 2 residential units located within it.
So the building safety regime for buildings in general and HRBs in particular changed significantly. I know from our previous discussions on the subject that the new regime came fully into force in April 2024. Yeah. So is it correct that developers now undertaking new building or design works need to operate under the new regime?
Yep, you're absolutely right. There were transition provisions in place to cover the position and the changeover from the old regime, but these have largely expired over time. Certainly new buildings, for the new buildings, the new regime will apply and strict penalties will be imposed for anybody failing to comply with it.
So again, one of the key changes to the regime is that developers who want to build, extend or change an HRB will need to follow and comply with certain gateway criteria.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, certainly. There are 3 gateway criteria now which need to be complied with for HRBs. The first gateway, Gateway 1, has been in force since August 2021 and requires the submission of fire safety information as part of the planning approval process for an original application, a planning application for an HRB project. Gateway 2 requires the client or someone on their behalf to submit building control approval application to the regulator, setting out details of the design and the method statement for the project, as well as details of the key appointees, and by that I mean the duty holders who will be engaged to deliver that project and comply with the building regulations requirements. Then finally, probably the most important gateway is Gateway 3, and this relates to the actual construction period from commencement to completion, and during that process you've got the client and the principal duty holders need to establish digital facilities for the storage of golden thread information. Mandatory occurrence reporting system needs to be in place and put in place by those duty holders and the client to report any failures to comply with the building safety regulations. There needs to be a reporting process and a documenting process in place for any change control provisions, particularly notifiable changes to the initial design which was submitted at Gateway 2 to deal with that, so because it's a live arrangement and a live reporting process. So they're the 3 gateways really, and they're very important to the process.
So the new regime effectively puts in place hard stops, preventing the development moving forward without achieving the given gateways. Gateways 1 and 2 are pre-commencement, but there seems to be a lot to pull together during the construction phase. Can you tell us more about the golden thread you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean the BSA imposes an obligation on principal duty holders to create and maintain a golden thread of building information evidencing compliance with the building regulations. All duty holders will be required to keep up to date the vital safety information about the building, including its design and management, and this will include the as-built drawings and any notifiable changes to the original design for the building which have been carried out during the course of construction, which might impact upon the certification of the building as being safe at Gateway 3. The golden thread must be captured and maintained digitally, and it is a live document which will be updated throughout the life cycle of the building. So if there's any extension to the building or any works carried out post practical completion of the original building works, then they will also need to be logged as part of that golden thread. And of course the golden thread and the information which make it up are key information sources which will form part of the application for building safety regulation approval at Gateway 3, which we'll come on to talk about shortly.
So the key players in complying with the new regime on the delivery of new HRBs and achieving compliance with the gateways are duty holders.
Yeah.
But who are they and what are their duties?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the BSA creates client, contractor, designer, principal contractor and principal designer duty holder roles. These duty holder roles apply to all building projects. It is simply that the duties are greater in relation to the performance of HRBs. Generally, duty holders are required to plan, manage, monitor and coordinate the activities to ensure BSA compliance. The client, i.e. the developer, is seen as setting the tone and culture of the project and therefore ultimately responsible for ensuring an environment is created to allow for compliance with the building safety regime. But the client can devolve those responsibilities to the other key duty holders, particularly the principal contractor and the principal designer. So you'll often find that the client devolves the responsibility for maintaining the golden thread, for example, required at Gateway 3 to the principal designer.
Now, there's been much discussion about who bears the time and money risks associated with achieving the various gateways. Gateway 3 being key, where the building works are essentially complete, but in order to allow for occupation, the client will need to obtain final approval from the regulator. So with the JCT having, of course, recently updated their suite of contracts, do they address this risk allocation?
Unfortunately, they don't, no. The JCT drafting in the 2024 edition, whilst it does pick up particular aspects of the changes required as a result of the Building Safety Act and Building Safety Regulation changes, it doesn't actually deal with what happens in terms of time and money risk if a project is delayed due to an inability to obtain building safety regulator sign-off at Gateway 3 to allow for occupation of the building. The problem that you've got here is obviously under the JCT, practical completion is defined as the contractor completing the works in accordance with the contract documents, and these are the documents, plans, drawings, specifications annexed to the back of the building contract. It doesn't deal with, or it doesn't specify at the moment or include in there, practical completion is also sign off under the building safety regulation regime. And the fact that it's silent at the moment is probably reflects the fact that the market hasn't exactly decided who they're going to allocate this time and money risks to. Because on the one hand, you could turn around and say, well, should simply be the case that practical completion should include practical completion has not taken place until building regulation sign-off has taken place. But this would mean that potentially the contractor could be incurring liquidated damages for failure to complete on time, when the reason why building safety regulation sign-off has not been achieved is because there's too much clogging up the process with the building safety regulator, and the contractor has done everything that they needed to do in terms of achieving that Gateway 3 requirement, submitting the application for Gateway 3 approval, making sure that the golden thread information is all there. So it wouldn't be their fault. Conversely, it could be the case that you as the client, if you're the developer, say, well, look, the application's there, we've done everything, the building safety regulator has rejected the application because you haven't done what's necessary to get it over the line. This, Mr. Contractor, should be your responsibility. So at the moment, I think that what you're going to get is a situation where the contract documents will set out the responsibilities of the parties as to what they're supposed to achieve and who's responsible for what in terms of delivering a sign-off at Gateway 3. And that will be determined as to whether you have or you haven't, as a contractor, failed to achieve practical completion, which will then tie to it an entitlement for the client to recover liquidated damages if the contractors failed in their obligations, as set out in the contract documents.